Welcome to 5 Dubs by MDDC Press. I'm your host, Rebecca Snyder, the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, and DC Press Association, which represents news media in our region. 5 Dubs focuses on the who, what, when, where, and why of local news media. We'll talk with the journalists about the stories behind the news. You can find more information about our guests in the show notes or on our website, www.5-dubs.com. Welcome to Lorenzo Bellamy of Bellamy Genn, who is joining us today to talk all things in the Maryland legislature. So welcome, Lorenzo.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Glad to be here.
It's exciting times. We're recording this in the first week of session. And so we've got, 87 more crazy days ahead of us. So
who's counting though, right?
Exactly. It's just all technicalities. So you've been working in Maryland politics and on the legislative side for decades now. Tell us a little bit about what Bellamy Genn does and your role.
Sure. No, thank you. So Bellamy Genn Group is a government relations firm based in Annapolis, Maryland. We have been in business in Annapolis since 2017. My partner, Genn, and I formed a firm in September of 2017. So I guess now we're almost we're 7 years into formation of this company. We are a government relations firm. Both of us are attorneys, and we're a government relations firm representing clients on a host of matters, including the issues of newspaper and media. Before the Maryland General Assembly, we also work before counties and county councils, the county executives. We also do work in Washington, D.C. with the Washington, D.C. Council and the mayor's office. And we also do a little bit of work on the bill Capitol Hill federal side.
That is a huge range of issues.
It's a range of issues, a range of spaces. But we've been doing this for so long. And so it is not nerve-wracking to us. And, no year or no session is the same. So it's never boring. So we're excited about that. And 2025 for Maryland is probably going to be one of the more exciting sessions that I've seen in quite some time.
Well, let's jump into that because, certainly we have sort of the federal level creates a little bit of uncertainty at the state level about what's happening. But then Maryland also has its issues, big one being the budget deficit and just sort of the general there's been a lot of change. So for our listeners, can you kind of sketch out what that sort of tone and tenor is? What are those big issues kind of floating out there?
Well, thank you, Rebecca. You mentioned the budget, and I will have to lead with that. Okay, that is one of the big issues, and everyone is concerned about that. Maryland is facing a 2.7, depending on the numbers, 2.7 to $2.9 billion deficit for FY26.
Huge. Mm-hmm.
If nothing is done, it can mushroom to potentially $6 billion by next 4 to 5 years. If nothing is done. Obviously, things will be done between now and then, and things are going to be done during this session. The governor has already announced $2 billion worth of cuts. He did that at the Eye on Annapolis. We heard that event, and so that still leaves about $700 million to $900 million. And there are no necessarily revenue projections to close that gap. One area that could close the gap that no one really likes to talk about, at least the governor doesn't want to talk about that, is raising taxes. Right? Sure. 75% of Marylanders have already said that they would oppose raising taxes. Of course, it depends on how you ask the question. If you raise taxes, but you're actually improving services, and there are different ways you could ask that question, potentially get a different type of result. And also, who are you going to tax? Are you going to tax? What bracket of folks would you tax and businesses would you tax? And so it depends on how you ask the question. But the issue still remains that we are facing a deficit, which is going to impact services and the requests that clients have, that businesses and organizations have for funding from the governor, whether it's operating budget or the capital budget. So the budget is the looming issue for this legislative session. Doesn't mean that other issues won't be addressed. Of course, they're in business to represent the people, and there are many issues besides the budget. But the budget will be driving a major driving force behind a lot of the decisions that we'll see. So revenue, where are they going to find the revenue if they're not going to raise taxes? Uh, they can come up with fees and fines. There's legislation to deal with a tax potentially on ammunition. Maryland Department of Environment is increasing fees on certain permits, but these are just these are small.
Those are small potato things. When you're looking at a $2.9 billion deficit, that's those are all sort of like rearranging the chairs.
Yeah. So, and last year, the General Assembly members, at least on the House side, wanted to have a conversation, a more robust conversation about raising taxes. The governor did not want to talk about this, was adamant about it. House Democrats are saying, hey, we should have this discussion. I have to say, I think everything is on the table. The governor is saying, no, I'm not going to do this, but I think everything's on the table, and it would be interesting to see how things pan out, where the revenue enhancements are going to come. And let me tell you this, given what happened at the national level with the elections, and the impact that this could have on Maryland, President-elect Trump has said, through his DOGE program, that there's a possibility of reducing federal employees, looking at, waste in government, et cetera, however you want to characterize it. Well, Maryland, 10 to 12% of Maryland residents work for the federal government. Right. Who knows how many more actually support those agencies through private sector vendors, et cetera. And so it's probably even bigger than that in terms of the impact that it could have. I would say the governor has a good excuse to talk about raising taxes based on what's happened at the national level and the direct impact it's going to have on Maryland and Maryland residents.
It'll be, and actually, I think all those conversations that bubbled up at the end of last session around like professional services taxes and whether there should be a tax on advertising and things like that. That really comes home to roost at what sort of our focus, which is news media, and we'll get to that in just a second. But
don't tax the lawyers, don't tax the lobbyists, right?
That's right. Well, don't tax the news media. And there's a lot of good policy reasons not to tax advertising, but yeah, I think those are all, nobody wants to have the lens trained on them in terms of revenue generation. But we do need growth for sure.
Growth. And so just, you were talking about, what's going on, sort of, I want to talk about the administration, and then we can move into, I guess, the legislature and what's happening and the changes there and the impact that that's potentially going to have. But one of the, when I talked about revenue, in addition to taxes, the governor has also talked about, even though he said it's not a priority bill for him, but he is looking at this as a potential revenue enhancer and business development program, and that is to allow for beer and wine sales in grocery stores, which could
personally I'm rooting for, but that's been a long time coming.
Long time coming. It's going to be a fierce battle. It's not a priority, major priority, I don't think, of his. He said it isn't, but I can see that it's something that's worth having a discussion, because it could. I don't know what the numbers will look like in terms of revenue for the state if it increases sales tax or not. I know that there are some legislators who are looking at increasing the sales tax on alcohol, with the funding, the difference going towards an equity fund that would encourage developers to build grocery stores, pharmacies, or gas stations.
And food deserts, yeah.
And food deserts.
Yeah.
So it's like an equity tax on alcohol. So we'll see. And then there's also cannabis. We know is at 9% tax cannabis, and so there's potentially they could look at cannabis and increase the taxes on that as well. So there are other, like I said, the governor said and legislators have said a lot of things are on the table. We don't know what all those things are, but what I just mentioned to you probably are some of them.
So I feel like the budget is really going to suck a lot of air out of the room, and anything that's not sort of revenue neutral at the very least is going to have a hard uphill climb. But then I think also in the backdrop of sort of what's going on in the session is this idea of, there's like right now in the beginning of the session, there's always a lot of ambiguity because people are moving and changing. And we've had a fair number of people leave the legislature for various reasons, which means that all those seats are kind of are changing. So how does that sort of affect your strategy in moving your clients' interests forwards? because like you don't even know who's on all the committees necessarily.
Well,
So
yeah,
talk about change.
yes, no, that's a good point. And, we knew some of this was going to happen, early on because of the folks who were running for these various offices. For example, Sarah Elfreth, who was a state senator, was running for Congress, and, she was a front runner. And so we should have been planning and thinking that if she won, that seat would become vacant. And so there were names that were circulating as potential replacements for her. And I'll get to that in a minute. But you're absolutely right. It does make for interesting political discussions around the table about who's going to go where and what roles are they going to play and what kind of relationship will folks have, what are their politics, et cetera, et cetera. So, very quickly, so on budget and tax, so Sarah Elfreth was the senator on budget and tax. And there was, when she became Congresswoman-elect, that seat became vacant in I want to say District 30 in Anne Arundel County. And so the Central Committee had to pick someone to replace her. And so there were several names, but two surfaced as front runners, and that was Delegate Dana Jones and Delegate Shanika Henson. In the end, a couple of days ago, Shanika Henson won
Right.
the 9, and she was not the governor, but the Senate president placed her on the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee.
Right.
So for our clients who were thinking, was it going to be Dana who was going to win, or is it going to be Shanika? Where would they go? There was speculation that if Dana had won, she would go to budget and tax. If Shanika won, not sure, but JPR, maybe another committee. So it ended up being JPR. So we've had to have clients just be prepared to engage with her as a new senator on that committee. And that committee actually has 2 new senators because Ariana Kelly got a job with the governor's office. And so now Sarah Love, who was a delegate from Montgomery County, took her place. And so then you had to have someone replace Sarah Love. And so I think that was Teresa Woman who replaced, and I need to get my...
Yeah. So it's a constant shift.
I mean, there is a opening, there's possibly openings in the Education, Energy, and Environment Committee. We're thinking that there's a possibility that Delegate Malcolm Rupp, who's from Baltimore, since Senator Jill Carter resigned off of JPR and off the Senate, is now the Board of Contract Appeals. That slot is opened up in that district. And so my understanding is that Malcolm Rupp is the leading candidate for that. Mm-hmm. And most likely he will go to that committee, the Education, Energy, and Environment Committee. So we are having to, and there's a lot more going on. Kathy Klossmeyer, who
right now that she's county exec,
county exec. So then who's going to be county exec, right? Vice chair of that committee was her, and now Antonio Hayes is now the vice chair of that committee from Baltimore City. Who's going to replace Kathy Klossmeyer? There's going to be
it can be a lot. It really can. And so
names that are circulating for, I heard Carl Jackson's name being Delegate Carl Jackson potentially will take that seat possibly on the Malcolm Ruff situation. And I think Delegate Attar from Baltimore as well, I think are the 2, but the Baltimore City Central Committee for District 40 won't make the decision until January 21st. So right now that District 40 has no representation, District 41 has no representation at the moment.
Right, which is, as a resident of District 41, that saddens me. And this whole idea of the Central Committee sort of appointing legislators, I know is one of the sort of hot button issues, just because I think I've read reports that about 40% of all current sitting legislators were started off by being appointed. And then, of course, you have the incumbency advantage in your next election. So it is. It definitely is something that you need to understand and think through.
That plays a role. I'm sorry. That also plays a role in where these legislators that are appointed get assigned, right? I mean, so that you may have your choice committee that you want to go to, but if you haven't been elected necessarily, you're appointed. It plays a different role versus when you're elected. Now the people have said, "Oh, we definitely support this decision." And so now that gives that person a little bit more credibility to sort of ask and lobby for a particular committee. So we're seeing that playing out right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so I think actually I would love to take a little detour just into advocacy, because from what, as we've talked, it occurs to me that, sort of the casual listener is like, oh my gosh, how could I ever insert myself into this process? And, if I care about an issue, how do I ever make my wishes known? And, when I talk to people about it, it really is as simple as like, start with your own elected representative, get to know that person, make sure they understand where they are, where you stand on certain issues, but then also kind of understanding where bills go. Like if you're interested in an issue like an environment issue, those bills usually go to environment and transportation, and sort of get to know the people in that committee. But do you, just before we get to news media, which I really want to get to, I want you to give a little ray of hope to people who are casually listening and thinking, I feel shut out of this process.
No, I look, obviously as a lobbyist, we love when organizations reach out to us to engage and help them navigate the myriad of situations in the Maryland General Assembly. But to the Maryland General Assembly's credit, they are a transparent body. And thank goodness for electronics and for social media and for the internet, where you have access to hearings, you have access to the list of bills. Now, this is like, there's inside baseball, right? And then there's sort of the transparent overall public opportunity to participate. You can sign up for hearings, you can submit written testimony. I mean, there's an art and science to some of that, but you have the opportunity to present sometimes on Zoom or in person, depending on what the bill is and the number of individuals that they will allow to testify. But it's pretty open. Now, and reading the bills can be technical, and so sometimes you may need help with that. They do provide some kind of summary. Sometimes right at the bill hearing, the day of the bill hearing, you may get a summary of the bill, so it's kind of late at that point. But that's when you have people on the ground, and I'm it is unfortunate to say that it's important to have boots on the ground, so to speak, engaging on your behalf, whether it's grassroots or advocacy before the legislature or the executive. It is important. We've been doing this for a long time and have established relationships. New people are coming, so we have to establish relationships with new people as well, and we do that through engaging in their events that they have during the interim, or also attending, meeting with them during session and engaging with them, identifying what their passions are, and making sure our clients line up. And if they know, and maybe not always line up, but certainly try to engage with them where there's common ground.
Sure.
So don't lose hope. There are plenty of opportunities out there to engage with your legislators. You should know who they are in your district. They respond because you are voters in their district. They respond to us as lobbyists because we bring the information and sort of the technical know-how, et cetera. But they respond to you differently because you are a voter in their district. And
there is no stronger catnip to a legislator than a constituent.
That's sure. Right. That's right.
And so let's jump in to news media, near and dear to my heart. And of course, for everyone listening, you may or may not know, but the Press Association lobbies on behalf of news media and our members. I'm in the session every spring. That's my focus in Maryland and Delaware, to make sure that the interests and the perspective, honestly, I when people ask me like, well, what do lobbyists do? I always feel like I carry the perspective of my members to a legislature, so that, a reporter who's off doing their own job or a publisher can go about their way. But like, I feel like we're conduits. So news media, I think overall, our portfolio has gotten so much larger than it has in the past. And I know you know this because you've been working on these issues for a good long time. I remember working with you back when I first started about 10 years ago on these issues. Oh, gosh. But we're still young and vibrant, don't worry.
That's right.
And so it used to be that, news media was really focused on things like the Public Information Act, public notice, protecting the public's right to know, and things of that nature. And I've seen over the years our portfolio expand. We've had to deal with digital advertising tax, stronger business issues around contracting or contractors. We have some like subscription renewal things that come in, online privacy. So even in my mind, sort of looking at big tech, Maryland's legislature is, and I think legislatures across the country are looking at how we can get big tech, so to speak, to pay their fair share.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes, because news media has websites and we're information platforms, although in different ways, we sometimes get lumped into that sort of big tech smackdown. And so I wanted to ask you, like, are you seeing that? How are you seeing that portfolio expand? And how are you, like, why do you think that is? Is it just things are more interconnected, or how do you see it playing out?
Well, I think with the internet and digital media now, I think it's more interconnected with, big tech. I think once you start dealing with the internet and digital print, and we can talk a little bit more about that, right? Because that's been a big issue. Then you can see the intersection between big tech, high tech, and digital media, and even to an extent print media, as they have digital media components to it. I have to say that what we, and Rebecca, you and I have been doing this for a long time. I represent Daily Record, just full disclosure. And, we've been engaging with legislators from in the last, let's say last 15, 20 years, who many of them grew up on, print newspaper, print media.
Right.
And now there's like a new generation of legislators and new generation of folks who are more used to reading their newspapers and magazines, et cetera, online. And so you're starting to see movement, and we dealt with this last session and have feeling we'll be dealing with it again this session, where folks are trying to move some of the notices and other requirements away from print, at least the mandatory requirement from that to digital. I am both a digital and a print person. I like the actual tech, to feel the newspaper and read it, and just like that. But I'm also have digital as well, and so I think you're starting to see sort of that transformation. I think, and I think probably in the next 5, 10 years, and talk about this with our respective members and clients, where is it going? And if you talk to 20 and 30-year-olds and maybe 40-year-olds, they're saying, look, we want to be more environmentally sensitive, and so we don't want to look at paper as, oh my gosh, we're taking trees, versus digital, which the footprint may not necessarily be as damaging in their minds. I think we have to navigate that. I think that's something that we don't really want to talk about too much, but I think it's in the back of the minds of many legislators. When I have conversations with them, the bill that we had to deal with last year, that was one of the reasons. So
yeah. Well, and I think it's really that shift to digital, and I think we would all be naive to think that that's not that's going away. I mean, certainly there's print, I think, will always be there in some way, shape, or form. People do. There's more gravitas in print. There's a whole host of reasons that people read it differently.
Not everyone has access to digital. Not everyone has access to digital, right? I mean, even the state of Maryland is as sophisticated and as wealthy as the state is. There are many communities that don't have necessarily the broadband. That's been an issue that's been talked about for a long time. And not everyone has. I mean, people have cell phones. A lot of people do have cell phones, but not everyone actually has access on a daily basis to digital, to a clear, strong signal for digital. And some people are very maybe comfortable using it, may not necessarily have the know-how, especially, I'm not going to put anyone in a particular category, but not everyone has access. And so it does present an access issue as well.
Oh, 100%. And we see that in reporter access issues as well, that sort of that shift to digital, because we're looking at sort of data sets being publicly available under the PIA, and how government information can be ingested and used. So, we're seeing it certainly in the ways we get information. And so as the Press Association, as we look at where reporter access issues go, how we're getting information, the business issues, and so forth, those really, the digital landscape kind of blankets that entire piece.
Right.
And so I think, just to close the loop on public notice, I think one of the really interesting policy things is to make sure that notices and public information stays sort of accessible and operated independently. we think very clearly that, if a government entity is required to publish something, they shouldn't be doing the publishing themselves, because a lot of it is about that independence.
What a conflict of interest potentially, you think?
Absolutely. I mean, just a smidge.
Yeah.
So there's policy benefits to making sure that the independence of information is important. And so we're seeing a couple bills. Since we were on public notice, let's stay there for a second. One of the major bills, and everything has a past, that we're working on is something that Delegate Linda Foley is putting forward, that's based on a local bill that we had last year, where for public notices, the ad could appear in the web version of the newspaper of record or the print version, and whatever version it gets into first starts the clock running, because very often notices have to run 3 successive weeks once a week, which is a very print sort of paradigm. And so as we navigate these different spaces, it really has called into, not question, but takes a little bit more thought as to, well, what is a news media outlet? Like, what does local news mean? How does that follow through? Like, when we try not to, personally, I try not to get hung up on the format. We need to make sure that the news is still present, that it's focused on local, and that it's that independence and notice. So I don't know what you're seeing in terms of those issues.
Absolutely. And I think, given what, and I appreciate the, Delegate Foley introducing her bill. I think House Bill 74.
74, yeah.
For your members that want to track that bill, I'm sure you'll provide that to them, but they can pull it up on the MGA, Maryland General Assembly website as well. But, given what we were dealing with last year with the public notice bill requirement that it would be print only, you're starting to see more and more pushback that came after that from legislators who once they became fully aware of what was going on, realized, wait a minute, there needs to be that independence that you're talking about. There needs to be that access that you were talking about. And I think they realized, wait a minute, and this had a potential detrimental impact in potentially eliminating and destroying several newspapers, local newspapers. And so, I think that was the unintended consequence of that legislation. So I think it's important for both digital and print to remain viable, to remain independent, and to have both accessibility for those that prefer or can access it by digital or by print. And the bill that you're talking about, Foley's bill, does both, right? And then if there's no print available, then it
can go into an online only.
Right.
And it has some good guardrails. As an association, we think long and hard, and we do it through our sort of membership criteria, like, okay, how can we make sure that it's a legitimate news organization, that, there's original reporting, so we have our little litmus test for membership. And I'm glad to see that, the legislature is really taking that seriously. And I feel good that in general, the Maryland legislators really do value their news media. Yeah. We have another bill that's coming up that hasn't been dropped yet, but is going to try for a payroll tax credit for newsrooms. And that's based on a bill, an amended version of a bill that was passed in New York last year. Delegate Vogel, again, out of Montgomery County, is taking the lead on that. And it's really, I think it's important for us all to recognize that the news media industry needs that kind of economic help. We are independent. We do our news gathering. We don't really have a content issue. Our problems really are in that shift from print to digital. It's sort of print dollars and digital dimes. Yep. And so, like, the economics truly don't work in the same way, but the cost of producing news, which is critical to inform the public and preserve democracy and all the things that we fight for truth and justice. Like, the model is just different.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that message needs to be shared with legislators, policymakers over and over and over again. I think the executive branch, I think the governor, to his credit, I think fully understands that. And I think the more and more we can explain that to those who are concerned about where print and digital are going, I think the arguments and the comments you just made, as long as we can keep that in front of folks, even the folks who are more adamant one way or the other, to let them know the value that both sides and both mediums provide.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's other, we always lobby on government transparency and again, reporter access. So and I would note also that we're still seeing bills coming in. Like right now, I think we're at 270 on the Senate side and about the same on the House side. There will be thousands of bills introduced before we're done. So it's still super early in the session, but we monitor all the bills that come through for things of interest to news media. But looking at the Public Information Act, there's stronger and larger coalitions coming up because the Public Information Act is super important to journalists. We're the professional users of that kind of information, but it's accessible to everyone. Mm-hmm. And so there's and I always like to say that everyone loves transparency until it applies to them. And that can be some difficult hurdles when we're looking through, how we get to transparency. But are you seeing anything out there that I know it's a great buzzword, but are you seeing anything that's changing around transparency this session?
No, I'm not seeing. Okay. I know that when you talk about Public Information Act, I know for police accountability and police records, I think that has been challenging.
Yes.
But and the transparency behind that and the police accountability boards and access to information, that is going to be a continuous and constant fight, I believe. But in terms of what you were talking about specifically, I've not seen that. Again, only 300 something bills have been dropped so far. We expect another 1,000 to 1,200 to come between now and January 17th, which is the deadline for bill requests.
Right. Gosh. So still so many things to go. And then regarding, I think it all goes back to revenue is in terms of like, if they're looking at an advertising or marketing tax again, if things like professional services taxes, there are, newspapers do have business components. And so we have to be really mindful about that, that we exist in that advertising space. That's one of the the pillars of news media in terms of how we gain revenue to produce content. Yeah. But it's, so more to come on that. And then another issue that we're working on, and luckily you don't have to go to the mat on it all the time, is anti-SLAPP, which is a bill that we've been working on with Delegate Rosenberg and Senator Shelley Heddleman for years now, which would strengthen the anti-SLAPP statute in Maryland. And it takes on a little bit more of an urgency or a little different lens this year, in that Pennsylvania has just enhanced their statute to protect against SLAPP suits, which are strategic lawsuits against public participation. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing even, that used to be such a sort of a journalist issue that deep-pocketed individuals would threaten lawsuits for things that were published or written about. And we're seeing those deep pockets kind of diversify and now sort of lash out sometimes at abusers or wielding the court systems against domestic violence survivors, or developers against citizens who are speaking out against different actions in their communities. Yeah. So we're seeing that be a much broader issue, but still relevant to the journalism community. So lots going on. Mm-hmm. With your permission, Lorenzo, I'd love to invite you back and talk through.
I think we'll know in a few more weeks what's going. Well, we'll know probably on the 15th of this month where things stand with the budget. That's when the governor has to release his budget to the public. So we'll have to come back and talk more about that and the impact that that's going to have, and any legislation that will have dropped by then, or certainly after the 17th of this month. So this is great. Rebecca, it's been always a pleasure working with you and these issues, and looking forward to, 2025 session. I think we're going to be doing some good things again. And so I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you a little bit more about the legislative process and what's happening for our members, your members.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Lorenzo. I appreciate you coming out. We will have you back. Maybe we'll do something around crossover, which will be the mid part of March, where that's where we see a lot of bills sort of fall by the wayside, and we know what horses are running. So
that's the deadline where bills have to cross the different chambers, opposite chambers. And if they don't meet that deadline, a lot of them end up going to rules where sometimes the bills die. It's a number to date. It can be artificial at sometimes, but it is something that people take seriously, because sometimes their bills will die if they don't make it to the opposite chamber and end up in rules.
So more to come. It was great to talk to you, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to all your members.
Thanks for listening to 5 Dubs with Rebecca Snyder. Please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts so that others can find us. What do you want to know about local journalism? Email me at rsnyder, SNYDER, @mddcpress.com. Interested in supporting our podcast and journalism? Please donate to our 501c3 Press Foundation. Find out more and see the full episode list and show notes at www.5-dubs.com.